And we have an interview for the history site. And why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
My name is Calvin Jarrett, known in the Steppin world as Taboo.
Okay. Taboo, when did you start Steppin?
First of all, I actually seen Steppin in 1974 as a freshman in high school. I seen two cats who later on I realized were legends in the dance at Phillip High School that really got my interest. Because back in that day, you know, man on man was the highest level of Steppin. So, you know, when I saw that, it kind of just, you know, Kim Boyd and them cats came up in Dunbar and got me and took me up to Phillips High School to one of their sock hops. And, man, I seen these two guys, man, and they were just, I had never seen nothing like that. And then that's what prompted my interest in Steppin. And later on, I found out that it was actually bopping then. And then, you know, as I moved around the city through project to project, I seen how popular it was. And then it just was something that I said that I just wanted to learn how to do.
Do you recall who those legends were?
Well, one of them was Ice Ray. Back then he was just Raymond Smith. And today he's Ice Ray, and Romeo, which was his partner. And like I say, now you had two cats, Slim and Herbie. Later on I found out that they were actually top of the line, and Raymond and Romeo came right up under them. And you had a whole lot of guys that was in that class, but it was always two men that actually dominated the Steppin game. Of course, they had the top flight women, and Judy and Nikki and Karen Perkins and, you know, Anna Bob and baby sister Denise Cobb. You know, women that if you seen now, you would absolutely see the grace and the glory of this dance that made a man and a woman look so awesome on the dance floor once they got it in sync.
Okay, a lot of people talk about women's footwork. Okay, were these prime examples of women's footwork back then?
Oh yeah, absolutely. These women were, man, it was just unbelievable if you compare today's steppers with them women, because as I said in the start, man on man was actually the highest level of the dance. So these top women would actually come, sit in the circle and learn from the men, and at that point they would match the footwork. And you know, as the day when you look at Johnny's and Demeter, and they had my buddy Lil Mike, you know, that's further on down the road, but all of these women could match us step for step. Because when our era came out, Raymond and Romeo, Slim and Herbie, they was long gone. And so Steppin had went into a slowdown period. And then here comes this bus driver, Sam Chapman, that rekindles the dance. And back then it's still bopping. And Sam Chapman, you know, opened a place up called the Dungeon on 109th in Michigan. And he came and recruited us, and you know, we just grew this thing. And he was in the DJ booth one day, and he coined it Steppin. And then he opened the same party on the west side at the Kingman's Club, and it was just amazing, man, to see the talent of these people on this dance floor. And it was, you know, even the women had got to the level where, I mean, they was top of the line, you know. And West Side and South Side, we never had a count. We just learned off instinct. It was actually a rhythm dance. And it was just, you know, it's just unfortunate that Sam used to take steel tapes, but he said he lost them, and they got lost in the flood. But to see these cats, Marky B, it was, you know, I mean, I was top of the line back then, but at any day, you know, them guys were at my level.
Yeah, you were talking about how Sam recruited several of you.
Yeah,
who else did he recruit besides you?
Me, Lil Mike, and me and Lil Mike brought George Macaroni. We had a whole crew, but back then you had Kim Boyd coming out of the Wentworth Gardens. You had me coming out of Dearborn Homes. You had George Macaroni, Lil Mike, and they was a slew of them cats down in the Ida B. Wells. and then you had James Calvin and all of these cats coming out of Robert Taylor. So it was basically on this level, the low end, and then you had Ty Skippy, which his brother Cubby was the man back then, and you had Benny, Rick, Eddie Snake, and them the guys that actually the meter came up under. And you know, so you had these groups of people, and then you had the West Side, which was the Keeman's Club. You had Don Linda's brother, Nut, which was one of the top steppers on the West Side. You had Skip,
Also known as Peanut, right?
yeah, Peanut. He was a top stepper, and then you had Bishop Juan, who was back then, he was just Magic Juan. He was one of the top steppers on the West Side. And somehow or another, Sam, these parties, Keeman's and Dungeon, ran concurrent at the same time. And one day Sam tapped me and Lil Mike on the back and said, come on, go with us. He took us out of the side door, and he took us to the Keeman's Club. These cats had never saw us, we had never saw them. And when we hit that dance floor, man, it was something that, till this day, the reason why the South Side and the West Side is connected is because we made that bond. Because even though you had the gangs and the stuff back then, Steppin would transcend all of that. So even though we were from the South Side, you had these cats, man, that said, no, man, them cats is all right. And so that allowed them to come to us to go to the West Side, and then in exchange we told Sam, look, bring them over to the Dungeon. So it was, hey man, it was just unbelievable what we could put together in the black community that was just so powerful. And that's, you know, other than the basketball players and the baseball players, that was king in our community.
Just so people who aren't from Chicago know, there's always been a little bit of animosity between the South Side and the West Side.
Well,
okay, and from what I'm understanding from what you're telling me, the dance transcended all that.
The dance transcended all that. Because what people have to understand is that on the West Side, you had the hustlers. On the South Side, we were known as bougie. You know, even though we came from the same element, they just looked at the South Side as just bougie, you know, uppity. Out West, they were just straight hustlers. You know, so when you bring that magnitude together, you got two different forces coming together, but Steppin just flatten that thing out, man. And it just, like I say, you know, when you look at all these cats that come to the West Side and the South Side right today, it still comes back to the day where Lil Mike and I went to the West Side with Sam Chapman. And once they seen us dance, they said, we got to create this partnership, and it never went away.
Mm-hmm. Now I've heard a lot of talk with in conversations with you and Kim Bowie and Stephen Luther about how a lot of the people who we consider premier dancers today were at places like the Dungeon, but they were kind of in the background.
Yeah, see, you know, the Dungeon was so powerful, you know, is that I can name a whole slew of cats that right today are real prominent in the stepping world today that came through the Dungeon with just wallflowers. Because you had, I say this, if you had 100 men in the Dungeon, all 100 of them could step. So trying to break through that barrier, because we was coming from so many different neighborhoods, you know what I'm saying, just to try to fit into that. And it was so scary because the dance floor was so respected. You just had to pay your dues. I know cats, prominent cats, right now, this day, that was at the Dungeon, man, 7, 8 years without ever hitting the dance floor. Because it was just that powerful. I mean, you respected, I mean, just like when you see crowded floors, you know, Love Mike and myself, Macaroni, it was a slew of us. When we come in there, like Sam used to say, you ought to see this place from 6 to 8. 6 to 8, you know, the floor is crowded.